It is time. Welcome to today's webinar on dialogue design and unlocking empathy with AI, brought to you by CCW Digital and Poly. I'm Brian Cantor, Principal Analyst for CCW, and your host for today's discussion. When talking about AI-powered experiences, we largely talk about removing the barrier to human connections, whether that means surfacing the right information, eliminating cumbersome work or key distractions, or just better connecting and aligning customers and the agents who can help them. The goal is always about improving understanding. It is about making communication more organic, natural, and effective. Unfortunately, data shows that many of today's AI experiences have had the reverse effect. They've resulted in experiences that are actually more difficult and demanding, and actually making conversations less clear and journeys far less streamlined. Only 15%, according to CCW Digital data, of customers right now have confidence in AI self-service as a support tool. And difficulty explaining their issue is actually the number one reason for their frustration, and the number one reason they're still looking to escalate away from AI-powered experiences and go to that traditional old-school human touch. Now, what's causing this problem, right? We know the technology is getting better. We know customers are demanding more autonomy and more AI-powered and convenient experiences. So why in practice are they avoiding them? Why in practice do they feel so misunderstood? Why in practice are the connections lacking? The reason is that we're often taking too microscopic an approach. Ironically, the webinar title here is Dialogue Design, but we focus so much on the dialogue of individual moments and so much on how cool the AI is in this one platform or this one interface that we forget that at the end of the day, real understanding is about the journey. It's about the context. It's about how everything comes together to ensure that what we're serving up for that customer is what they need to see. And when the customer asks a question, we're taking all that context into account when we deliver that answer. Over the course of this webinar, we're going to take a new approach to dialogue design, one that takes the entire journey into account and really looks at how we compare AI and humanity to deliver best for our customers, to hear what they're saying, to anticipate what they need, and deliver it time and time again. Now, as a reminder, you can ask questions at any time using the console on your screen. Anything we don't get to live, I know our speakers will be thrilled to answer after the fact. Speaking of those speakers, let's get to know them. So first, Oliver, I want to take a moment to get to know you. You especially have a real focus on this notion of dialogue design, so I can't wait to dive into the nuances. Tell us about yourself, your background, and your role at your company.
Yeah, sure. Well, thank you so much for having me, Brian. It's really fun to be here. My name's Oliver. I'm a lead dialogue designer at PolyAI. I've been at the company for just over 3 years. It's been a very exciting past few years to be in the conversational AI space. The whole world has changed quite a bit in that respect since then. My background actually I come from a linguistics background academically. So I studied formal linguistics, trying to model and dissect the human language faculty and the way that humans interact. And so a lot of what I do at PolyAI as a dialogue designer is try to use that expertise and apply that expertise to create experiences that are as intuitive as a human to human interaction. We are so hardwired, so accustomed to navigating the world, navigating our tasks via collaborative dialogue with other humans. And so my job is really to bring that spirit of collaborativeness to human AI interactions over the phone.
Yeah, and already I love, and we're going to obviously dive into a lot of this when we get into the heart of the discussion. But one of the things I love that you really preface there is the notion of thinking about outcomes, right? It's when you're talking about the idea of like making conversations more human, making them more accessible. It's not doing it to show off how advanced the AI model is. It's doing it because when we have that level of understanding, we can work more collaboratively. We can be more empathetic. We can form a better journey. And rooting technology, rooting process in that mindset, that's what it's going to take to be successful. So I can't wait to really pick your brain on some of how your background and how your thought process drives some of the innovation that's happening in the space. But we're going to have to wait a little bit longer because we have to get to know Matt. And one of the reasons I like having Matt here is, there's a lot of marketing copy. There's a lot of, excitement around technology. But at the end of the day, we need to know what's happening in practice. We need to know what's happening when we try to deploy this to make our customers happier, to make our employees more empowered. What does it look like? And Matt, coming from that sort of role, you have a really awesome perspective. So tell us about yourself and your company.
Yeah, my name is Matt Vacarezza. I am a chief solutions architect at Pacific Gas and Electric Company. Pacific Gas and Electric Company serves about 15 million customers in Northern and Central California. And my role specifically over my tenure is I've more or less led PG&E's contact center technology. So everything from our call routing to our coworker technology that they're using to help service customers, pretty much everything in between, kind of picking up the phone, calling PG&E, and down to the coworkers and all of their end user devices and applications. But here, specific for the dialogue discussion is, we're really, breaking ground in our company from an AI perspective, and looking and currently working on replacing our legacy touchtone IVR with a AI generative conversational bot, and getting away from the touchtone. So we're learning in partnership with the Poly team, and looking to build, like we're talking about here, these experiences and those journeys for customers, because our biggest goal is to provide a 10 out of 10 for our customers when it comes to that experience interacting and doing business with PG&E.
Well, with that mindset, with these great speakers, not only are we committed to providing a 10 out of 10 experience for those customers, but we're going to be able to position a 10 out of 10 webinar for this audience. I can't wait to hear the different perspectives here. So, Matt, one of the things that you talked about, you kind of gave the vision of what you're trying to achieve and what sort of your journey looks like, what that roadmap entails. And I know we'll dive into even more future plans over the course of the discussion, but I want to start off by starting from the beginning, the why, right? You told us some of what you want to do, but ultimately, what are the customer experience objectives? What are some of those challenges, the things that keep you up at night, the things that you want to achieve that maybe AI plays a role in executing for you?
Yeah, love to. It's actually been quite the journey over the last, I'd say, 5 years, heavily, to where with touchtone IVR, we have struggled with customers and getting, what it is that they actually want when they're calling PG&E. We've really come to learn over the last 3 years, society just really doesn't have patience to sit through touchtones and layers upon layers of IVR menus and hope that they come across something, that relates to what it is that they're calling about. And we went through multiple different iterations of, tweaking the menus from a touchtone perspective, and maybe it's this and maybe it's that, and the flavor of the month, and either in PG&E or in California is changing. And so we were constantly moving things around, and we never were getting the results of it. And we knew we had to do something different to allow customers to just get to the point of what it is they're calling about and not rely on us to guess why you're calling. And so over the last 2 years now, we have been, we've gone through the pilot phase, and we're going through a migration phase right now where we're providing customers the ability to where it's tell me why you're calling, and getting directly to that reason, and then allowing ourselves to do what we need to with the customers in order to identify them and send them down the right path. But it has been quite a change for us. We see very good results, and ultimately trying to make that experience and that journey a lot more streamlined for customers, fall in line with our culture and our values within PG&E to get that 10 out of 10 experience, and make life easier for customers in doing business with us.
Yeah, and I think you hit on two really important points, which is the importance of reducing effort, but also the importance of reducing effort by virtue of making interactions more personalized and more tailored and more customized to the customer. There's always that old myth where the rise of the effortless experience was sort of, is this going to jeopardize the ability to form real connections? And I think, as you articulate, as so many people know, real connections are the root of reducing effort. When you know who this customer is, what they're likely inquiring about, you save so much time, so many steps, so much headache, and you get right to solving the problem. And of course, when you make it easy for them to articulate what they're getting in touch about, you also make it easy for you to learn more, and in turn provide easier, more personalized experience down the road. So they really go hand in hand. Now, Oliver, you, of course, within your organization, of course, across Poly, work with different companies, cross industry. How does what Matt said, what some of Matt was trying to achieve, align or misalign with what you're seeing across the board?
It's a very, am I unmuted? Yeah. Okay. It's a very familiar story. You cited that data in your intro about how a lot of people still don't have trust or confidence that an automated system is going to be able to actually understand their issue, their question, their concern. And I think that in large part that still comes from these banked up experiences of interacting with systems like touchtone IVRs or keyword oriented IVRs, where, to use a term of art, the user is basically trying to reverse engineer the information ontology that the designer has baked into that system, where they're trying to think, okay, I know what my issue is. How would the person who designed this IVR have categorized that issue within this branching tree of possibilities? And so that's an incredible cognitive load to put on someone who's just trying to, have an issue solved. And it's also not at all what you're doing when you're talking to another person or collaborating with another person on a task. You can just sort of, as Matt said, express your issue. It's very open-ended. I also appreciated some of the stuff you mentioned just a second ago, Brian, about already knowing who the customer is and anticipating their concerns. That's something that we also see a lot of our clients wanting to implement in their solutions, are things like, can we tell from the phone number that the user is calling about that they might be experiencing this issue? And can we preempt that issue as soon as we pick up the phone in order to, build confidence with the customer and hopefully counteract some of those really negative experiences that they've had? I think, unfortunately, it's going to take a lot to erase those, years and years of disappointing IVR experiences that people have had. And I think that there's been, huge strides made in that direction with the proliferation of ChatGPT and people seeing, particularly with generative AI, all of the amazing things that it's capable of. But I would guess that when it comes to people being suspicious of automated systems or not thinking that they're going to be able to address their concerns or understand them, a lot of that comes from those sort of banked experiences of being misunderstood and, trying to navigate a labyrinth of an IVR, which is very often what we at PolyAI are coming in to replace and update for our clients.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that really comes to light here is the potential for either shortcuts or contradictions, right? So we're talking about be where customers are, really accommodate where they want to communicate, how they want to communicate. That sounds great, right? That sounds really customer centric, but in a cost conscious organization, that can easily become, okay, now we have carte blanche to just get rid of all of our human agents and really focus on, very low touch self-service environments, which are cheaper, and perhaps miss out on the customers who want to escalate. We talk about, customers don't need over the top conversations. They don't need you to ask them about their, their days and their pets and their families and all that stuff. But that can easily become an excuse to not have any personalization, just be so transaction and so issue oriented. We know that's not good as well. So curious if either of you have a take on, as we start to see how technology can streamline certain things, as it can scale certain things, how we still maintain some of those essential human factors so that we're using technology to elevate what we do as opposed to eliminate some of what we do, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah, it does. One of the things that we've kind of likened in this whole effort is that we want to actually allow the customers to dictate the technology, tell us what they want, what's going to make better experiences for them, and give them the technology when they want to use it, but also like not just an agent whenever they do and don't, right? We want them to have that choice. It's always available to them. In addition to that, like the whole dictation of technology, it's something new for us. We've always guessed, right, in terms of what we think the customer wanted. And we've been given a lot more opportunity and visibility, transparency into that customer's tone, reaction, right, to how the interaction with the bot is actually working. And that's actually given us a lot more insight to providing even more for the customer than we ever have before. So it has been nice. In terms of like getting rid of the agent, the live coworker, right? We don't see it that way. We see this technology allowing us to be able to really take care of the easier calls. What can we do from a self-service perspective in a lot more fluid manner, and free up our experts, our agents, our coworkers in the contact centers for those more difficult conversations, allow them to be the SME with the customer, where that that empathy and that sympathy can actually be applied more so in those more difficult conversations. So that's kind of the stance and the direction that we've taken thus far with this new journey that we're on.
Yeah, I think that's also important because it does hold your self-service to an important standard, right? If we're going to get to the point where humans can play that more consultative expert role, then two things have to be true. One, we obviously need self-service to be effective enough to absorb issues so that agents have the physical bandwidth and mental capacity to take on that extra work. Two, self-service has to capture enough from all customers, whether it's a contained issue or not, to be able to fuel more personalized, more empathetic conversations for the agent. Because if the agent gets no context, then
Yeah.
they're not going to be able to use any of their skills anyway. So, really does start then with really elevating self service. Now, obviously, self service is not a new concept by any means. I mean, FAQ pages, traditional IVRs, touchtone systems we've been talking about, these have been around for decades. And yet, it's come to the surface recently because we feel like with the rise of conversational and generative and agentic AI technology, it can be a more dynamic offering. It can be more personalized. It can be more conversational. And yet, as I alluded to in my intro, despite being technically better, it's not necessarily being practically any better received. We still have a lot of adoption challenges, still have a lot of concerns. Now, Matt, when you and I were preparing for this discussion, we talked about some of the challenges you've seen when it comes to having the right idea for self-service and actually executing. So maybe walk us through some of those challenges and complexities that you're aware of from your experience in the space.
Yeah, I mean it is different, right? We've been so used to kind of like the very linear call flow, right? And press this, do that. And trying to get a different mindset in our teams of how we think about the design that we want to build and really bringing in that dialogue piece that we are trying to emulate with the customer or with the customer in mind, right? So, I mean, we have definitely had some pain points that we've gone through in terms of like having that mindset and that lens on the designs that we're building, and getting out of kind of the very simple mindset of that do this or press that. It's really opened up our eyes to how much more we can bring into the experience with customers. Just like as an example, from an outage call flow perspective, right? It was very easy for us to just say, all right, customer, what's your phone number? We'll do a simple lookup on you. We either do or we don't have outage activity, or anything active for you right now. We've, in this, new life of AI, been able to bring in more of the proactive. We're having that customer call in. We're doing a couple of pings on a couple of APIs, giving customers the impression that, oh, we see why you're calling, and oh, by the way, we also see you're calling about this active outage, right? And trying to tie in a lot of other historical data too, at least from a long-term standpoint. We're tying in current outage activity, giving customers the option to do text message preference alerts, for updates on outages within the IVR a lot more fluidly. And long term, we see customers ask like, this keeps happening, right? Why does my power keep going out, 6 times this month? We're going to be bringing in that outage history long term so that customers can at least see and understand kind of what is or currently, what has been happening, and give them a little bit more insight even into more cause and fixing of issues. So we're learning more about the customer and how much more we can do with this in a very fluid and natural way.
Well, that's a great point. Frankly, that's probably another webinar topic, which is the notion of really closing the loops on self-service. Because one of the areas are if we're trying to get our customers conversing more actively, sharing more about what they're going through in a self-service environment, they have to know that that's going somewhere. They have to know that it's informing a better interaction, that's informing better processes. And if, like, when they escalate to the agent, what they shared is completely forgotten and the agent's starting from scratch, that sort of makes them feel like they wasted their time. Similarly, if they report a similar issue and time and time again, and no effort's been taken on the root cause, no effort's been taken to proactively avoid it, they also feel like they're speaking into the abyss. They're not speaking into anyone who can really hear them. And so either way, you're left with the sense of what I say in self-service is not worth my time. I might as well just press 000 or type agent, agent, agent until I get to who I want. Now, but within the context of what you're talking about, you also brought up a great point on the notion of complexity, right? The journeys are less predictable. They're requiring data from more sources. Now, that's good in the sense that it means that these conversations will be more dynamic. But it's also challenging in the sense that we know a lot of contact centers already we're struggling with fragmentation and out of date systems and challenges. And now we're relying on all these to come together in an even higher, a greater scale to reach an even higher standard. That can be daunting. Additionally, that says nothing of the accuracy risks, the compliance risks that come into play when the stakes of these issues are higher. So, Oliver, from the perspective of a technology provider, how should organizations be thinking about the fact that we're making self-service more dynamic means that we have to address all these complexities internally?
Yeah, I mean, I can definitely speak to this because this is something that like this sea change in agentic AI and generative AI based implementations really allows us to dive into in a way that we couldn't back in the like sort of classical NLP world, where it was really hard to build for both breadth and depth. You know, you could force a customer into a sort of very rigid flow, you know, to go and look up their account and check their outage, but it was impossible to, you know, answer a follow-up question for them that they might have about one of those steps, because that would require departing from the flow and, you know, having that information somewhere. So I think that really control is the name of the game here, and specifically exerting control over large language models in a variety of ways. You know, one thing that like the PolyAI platform Agent Studio allows you to do is configure both a giant repository of knowledge that is a knowledge base with all of the information about your company and all the questions that the users might ask sort of from a breadth perspective, that then is coupled with retrieval augmented generation and different ways of surfacing accurate information, and couple that with sort of stepwise prompting and more flow type control over a large language model that are constantly working in concert with each other throughout the entire interaction, so that you don't get this kind of fragmentation effect where once you've entered this flow, it's impossible to get out of it. It's impossible to ask a question about something else. You know, you can't escape a flow that you entered accidentally, be like, no, actually, I'm not calling about an outage. I'm calling about an issue with my stove. And, you know, being able to exert different kinds of technical control over large language models in different ways allows you to create that kind of seamless jumping around experience, which, you know, is sort of the hallmark of a human to human interaction, which is that they're not linear, they're not rigid, they're flexible, they're dynamic. And so that's really the world that we're operating in. And that's, I think, really sort of where a company like PolyAI shines.
Yeah, and I think what you hit on about the notion of when we think about human-like, and we'll get into this when we dive deeper into dialogue design and construction, but we talk about human-like, there's a mistake that it's the superficial. It's like, let the AI agent, let the bot, let the IVR communicate like a human. And while you don't want it to sound totally unlike a human, actually trying to mirror everything about a human is not really the goal as far as conversational content. What you want to be mirroring is conversational behaviors. Like to your point, the fact that I may ask you about the weather, and then my follow-up question may be about what are you doing this weekend? It doesn't have to be, oh, what is your take on like the impact of the weather change this year? You know, it's not like, it doesn't have to all be in that constrained flow. That's how humans behave. It's far more important as we're designing automated experiences to think about how humans want to behave and engage than it is to like stress over individual tiny bits of content, whether they sound like they came from, you know, a seasoned expert or, you know, a bot. That's less important than does it really align with their intent. And so as we start to think about self-service, really understanding, are we designing journeys and usability that is meant for how humans behave? That's going to have to be a top priority for us. And as you start to think about whether your data is coming together, that's what you want to be, you know, cleaning up. That's what you want to be aligning. That's what you want to be unifying, what it takes to make this interaction more dynamic, more engaging, and more human-like. Now, you know, kind of diving into some of the heart of how we actually make this happen. So one of the things that we associate with humanity is this notion of empathy, this notion of being able to put ourselves in our customer's shoes. And this is already something, Oliver, that Matt alluded to when he was talking about how they always rooted in the customer. They always listen to what they're going through. And I want to get your take on this notion of empathy, this notion of humanity, particularly as we look at AI, because, you know, can AI be empathetic? Should it be? What role should it play? Curious if you could help unpack all this for us.
Yeah, sure. You know, one thing I'll say, which I hope is not controversial, is that AI cannot experience empathy. So when we talk about doing, you know, building empathy into an AI-based implementation, we're talking about the design, and we're talking about building an interaction that's empathetic and empathizing with the end user, you know, when we are working to implement the AI, not like making the AI sound sad when the user is sad, or starting every utterance with apologies or commiserations if the user is articulating an issue. I think that so often, and this touches on something you also said in your intro, when we think about conversation design, it's easy to imagine that that is copywriting, basically. It's saying, how exactly do I want to word this so that it is maximally or minimally offensive to the user, or that they are most likely to believe me or trust me or adhere to the advice that I'm giving them. And I think so much of what empathy actually is about making usable interactions over the course of the conversation, not any particular utterance, sort of as you said. I think, call center workers have different personalities and different ways that they phrase things. And that's not to say that there's not, important compliance considerations around articulating certain things in particular ways. But I don't think we want to get so hung up on exactly how something is expressed that we lose sight of the sort of, as I was saying before, the flexibility of the entire conversation, the functionality, the am I able to get from this topic to this topic smoothly? As I'm traversing a flow, like, looking up my account, finding an outage, am I receiving feedback that tells me that I'm making progress toward my goal? Is the AI being over informative? Is it providing me information that I don't need, or too much explanation for each step in the process? I think a lot about the AI being cooperative, which, in a linguistics pragmatic sense, we talk about the responses being relevant, accurate, and not over or under informative. And I think that that's much more what we're thinking about on the utterance to utterance level. And then the empathy really comes in when I'm designing a flow, I'm sitting back and thinking, okay, I want to find out what's going on with my electricity. What am I actually going to ask? What's the first thing I'm going to say? Would it make sense, would it make sense after I say, okay, I think my power's out, for the agent just to say, all right, what's your account number? Or do they need to explain why they're asking for my account number? I think probably they don't need to explain it, even though AIs love to do that. This is why, again, just to circle back to this question of control, I think agentic AI and implementing LLMs in AI is not just about like giving them this giant repository of information, this giant prompt, and saying, have at it, here's all the possible functionality. It actually, you have to exert a lot of control in structuring these interactions in ways that make sense to people, feel intuitive to people.
Yeah, and so that's I want to kind of continue down this track and really get at the heart of the webinar, the heart of your dialogue design approach, because I think what you said there, do not stress as much over the individual utterance, but instead focus on how it all comes together. I don't think many would disagree with that, but I feel like that there's more to it than just calling it, focus on the journey, not the interaction, right? There's like a reason when you're thinking of dialogue, how that all comes together. So I'm curious what the Poly vision is for dialogue design and why you see that as so crucial as organizations really look to balance what AI can do with their fundamental sense of humanity and customer centricity in their organization.
Well, I mean, I think the vision includes people like me, in the sense that I don't think that large language models are out of the box built to do this, particularly not for voice-based applications. And it requires someone to actually sit down and think about that experience and to put themselves, to have that bit of empathy for the call center worker and to put themselves in the shoes of the call center worker to start with. An example I like to give is like, let's say a user calls in and is asking for an address. What address can I send my bill payment to? A chatbot or a large language model would very easily just regurgitate the address that's in the knowledge base. That's very simple, particularly in a text-based application. Someone could go in and copy and paste that address. If I'm on the phone with someone and someone says, what address can I send my bill payment to? The first thing I'm going to say is, sure, do you have a pen and paper to write it down? Because we're on the phone with each other, and that has different cognitive considerations, cognitive limitations in terms of what information you can actually process all at once. I'm going to say, do you have a pen and paper to write it down? They'll say yes. Then maybe I'll give the first line of the address and await confirmation. Then I'll give the second line of address. And this is why I think even something like that, which could in theory be a single utterance, actually does in practice and in the mind of the designer transcend the individual utterance and turn into a whole exchange. I hope that example was maybe illustrative.
Not only was that example important and effective, but it also is important for, I think, just the general idea of where omnichannel is headed, right? Like the mistake was first, It was because everyone's social and chat channels were so weak. It was like, let's just try to make them more like the phone or we're not omni-channel. I got the logic there, but I almost feel like the thought leadership community has almost overcorrected. And now it's like make everything identical, forgetting that no, there's a reason why people have channel choices. There's a reason why different channels exist, and understanding the different behaviors, the different expectations, the different, like you said, cognitive considerations that happen in different interactions. These all have to be built in that design. So essentially, it's when you're designing what an interaction should look like, you're not just deciding, okay, what's the problem? What's the solution? It's what's the problem and what does the solution look like for that customer in that moment of the journey in that channel. And whether that's being delivered by an AI or a human employee, that's going to be really important to think about. And so I really like the approach here. And I think that, again, it's recognizing that the right thing to say is very contextual. The right thing to say is very channel specific. The right thing to say is very urgency specific, and understanding that's going to be really key. Now, Matt, obviously we can have people who understand this perfectly, like Oliver. We have his background. I love the background. I love the framework here, but we know that not every customer is Oliver. We know that not every customer is going to think about all these things the way we do. And so, you mentioned the importance of calibrating it against the customer. What are some ways that you ensure that, okay, we design this awesome self-service journey, the handoff makes sense to us, the conversation makes sense. What does the customer think about it? How do you start to get that voice data from them?
It's interesting. We started this journey as like the experts, being the ones that were primarily working with Poly and primarily working on the design and what we thought we needed the experience to sound and feel like. We actually pivoted to where we have what's called a process improvement team. So they're kind of like our big time SMEs in the contact centers. And not only are they on the phones, but they're also kind of as a operation, kind of making sure that our processes and such are in line. And what we've done is we've actually brought some of these process improvement team members into our project with us, and they're helping us influence how the design should look. How should it feel? Typically hear this from the customer. We might want to provide some of this input or context into the conversation. And so not with them being a part of the design process, they're also involved with us from a UAT perspective before we're actually deploying and making sure that that whole flow and experience is sounding as they, would be interacting with the customer. They're also a part of kind of like our post-production quality assurance process. We've taken the step to where we are treating our bot as if she's just another coworker. And we're going through the quality assurance process that we would with any other actual coworker in the contact center, and looking for those and listening for those opportunities to tune, to add, to tweak any way that we can on a pretty regular basis, actually. And doing all that we can from an expert standpoint, those that know the customer the best, and making sure that our bot is actually treating the customer as if they were talking to a coworker in our contact center.
Yeah, I think that mindset works really importantly. And I think, again, we often talk about buy-in purely from getting it at the top. Like, we come to these webinars, we come to events, we read white papers. It's like, how do I get my CEO or my IT department to want to invest in, customer experience improvement? Important question, but not the only question. The other thing is, once I make this investment, how do I ensure that the people who are actually going to use the tech are getting the right value out of it? Or not only are they going to be mad, but we're not going to get the ROI, and the people that I sold this new project to are going to be mad at me, and I'm going to be in trouble. So I think you definitely want to get that user involved. Now, Oliver, when we think about the ramifications for users, a lot of times these conversations, and we even started this way, it's about making the customer happy, reducing effort, increasing personalization, being more anticipatory, all important priorities. But at the end of the day, we do know that there are non-negotiable corporate considerations. There are accuracy and liability concerns. There are compliance concerns. There are brand reputation things that have to be weaved into all dialogue. Now, how do you sort of, again, account for those when you're thinking about creating the best possible dialogue experience, creating the best possible journey? What are some ways you consider some of those risk management factors as well? And we got our first mute of the day. What made it like 40 minutes, so that's good.
Do I win something? Or maybe Matt wins something for not doing it. So I'm going to circle back to this idea of control, and this is why it's super important when you're, thinking about implementing a solution like this, not just basically to throw GPT into your contact center and say have at it. Like you have to be implementing within a framework, within an architecture that allows you to exert control for exactly those kinds of reasons. When you're working within a framework where the AI is going to have to access tools, it's going to have to ping APIs in order to access account specific information. It's going to have to, access a knowledge base in order to retrieve accurate information. You are working within a framework where you can exert different kinds of control for the purpose of compliance and for the purpose of legal reasons as well. And so that's something that we take advantage of all the time at Poly, and something that our platform allows us to do. We can say, instead of leaving the LLM to respond freely in this turn, we can say, actually, if the user mentions this, call this function, which will return a hard-coded bit of text that we've pre-scripted because this is a legal matter. Or, if we have different ways of forcing, the language model, like in the case of PG&E, like there are certain things a user might call about that are potential emergencies and need to be transferred immediately. And so we have ways of identifying keywords in sort of a more brute force way on top of the language model's freedom to sort of identify user intent to make sure that none of those things slip through the cracks. So again, it's about control, and I'll emphasize again, a variety of means of control. When we think about a large language model, there's a lot of thought about training it on user data to respond accurately and in the persona of a call center worker. But on top of the training and the fine tuning, there is also this additional layer of control. Are we filtering out the responses before they get streamed back to the user? What information are we exposing to the models in order for it to answer accurately so that it doesn't go off the rails and start incorporating irrelevant information? So it's all about control, and it's about these different kinds of control that you can implement.
Yeah, and I think as you're implementing those guardrails and those risk management factors, those triggers to send it to a live person, you also want to be transparent, and you need the language around the transparency. So I think of one of this all-time, I'm not going to say the name of the brand because I've said it enough, but there's been one retail store that I've cited before where I was playing around with their chatbot, and no matter what I asked, everything from what are your store hours to do you have any coupon codes to more detailed stuff, it would always say, I'm not equipped to answer that. I can forward you to a live agent. And then of course, so one of the questions was like, do you sell products for someone with sensitive skin? In that case, I totally understand why maybe you don't want an automated agent kind of providing that answer because it could have actual health consequences. But so I can understand that, but explain that so that and don't make me think that your bot just doesn't do anything or it's going to cultivate those negative expectations you have. So I think as you start to build those things in, you also want to think about what is being shown to the customer. Do they understand why this has to be escalated away? Do they understand why there has to be a guardrail in place? Because otherwise they're not going to know in the future why they should trust your bot for something that it could answer. And so I think that's really important there. Now, getting into as we've kind of our last phase of the conversation here, it's really kind of how this all comes together. Now, Matt, when Oliver was talking about this framework for dialogue design, it wasn't just like make AI agents better. It was also thinking about where AI and human agents can come together at different parts of the journey to maximize empathy, to maximize customer centricity. You mentioned earlier that you want to have your employees focusing on more complex work, but really understanding where they're going to fit into the journey. What do you see that specifically looking like? And maybe how might the way you measure and assess and manage them change moving forward?
Yeah, and I to be honest, I think we're still kind of learning the right mix there. We are with our coworkers in the contact center trying to still educate them on why this is good for the business and for our customers. And so I don't know that I have kind of like the best exact answer for you on this one, but what we're trying to do is we're trying to give like our coworkers more exposure to the performance, to examples, how customers are actually rating them through our, VOC and transaction scores, and giving them the verbatim, giving them examples of the call to actually hear the customer and the bot actually interact with each other, and allow them to just, like a customer, trust the technology, because we need their ear, we need their input into things, we need their feedback in things that are actually taking place. Because in the utility industry, it seems like the book is wide open. Anything can happen, and trying to, develop those experiences, not like try and like match everything that needs to be that needs to happen and be spoken to, but being able to make sure that we can address it. You just brought up something that I think is like what we've been challenged with and addressing is the trust in the bot and not having an instance like you did with the chatbot where it says, I'm sorry, I don't have information for that. We're still trying to also kind of close that gap ourselves and use our coworkers, our experts to help close that gap as well. Because again, we need the trust. We've battled with trust with technology for decades, pretty much. And this is kind of that fresh start for us to be able to bring that not only to our customers, but also to our coworkers. And that's, trust that the technology is actually here to help us and our customers.
And I really like that perspective, and I especially applaud you because that's a tricky question for two fundamental fallacies in it. And it's a common one, and I had to challenge you with it because it always comes up. But there are things that you started to illuminate, which I want to kind of pass to Oliver here. One of which is the notion that we ask this question, like, what are our agents going to do? What is complex work? But the truth is, this is going to be conditional upon how the self-service adoption is embraced by the general consumer audience, how they behave through AI experiences, and what that leaves them needing to ask a human agent is still yet to be determined in a lot of organizations because they haven't done the legwork to even have an effective self-service tool. Once self-service becomes effective, we can say, okay, these are all the intents that we've handled. These are the new things that agents have to focus on. So without that data, it becomes very hard to figure that out. Two, when we say, oh, what is AI going to handle? What are humans going to handle? It misses out what I want to ask Oliver about, which is the opportunity for collaboration. The idea that it's not always these are the 12 issues that every chatbot can answer. These are the 8 issues we expect agents to answer. The reality is probably most of those 20 issues are going to require some combination of both factors here. So how is Poly, how do you see the industry thinking about opportunities for more inner conversation or inner journey collaboration?
Well, so checking to make sure I'm unmuted. Before I answer that latter question, the first thing you said there dovetails into something also that we think about a lot at PolyAI, which is this the collaboration of the AI and the call center manager or the solutions architect, and the ability that AI gives you. So I it might be more accurate to say collaboration between the call center manager and their data by means of AI. There's something that automating parts of the conversation or particular flows or highly repeated transactions within a call center allows you to collect a granularity of data that will give you insights into your customer's behavior that is just not possible with human agents. And it'll tell you things about where people are dropping out of particular flows, like what are there gaps in our knowledge base, things that people are asking about. And so one of the tools that we have started incorporating into our workflow a lot is this thing called Smart Analyst, where we will start, where we can basically talk to our data through a large language model and say, what are users calling about? Give me 5 unhandled things that users called about in the past week. And then we can look at those as opportunities to expand our knowledge base, to expand the different intents that the automated system can handle. So as you said, again, it's not just these like same 12. To your latter point, though, I think that there's always, and we've sort of touched on this a couple of times, there's a sweet spot to hit where whether it's 80% of people have 20% of the problems or 20, like whatever it is, there's going to be a certain number of user intents or user journeys that we can automate fully. And a lot of the time that's going to be a pretty narrow set within the scope of possibilities, but might be a pretty significant set within the actual volume of user intents that are represented. And then there's going to be a certain set that we can, make some progress towards and then hand off, sort of as you're saying. And whether that is looking up a user's account and then populating, something for the agent to see with their account information so they don't have to re-authenticate them, incorporating multi-channel in this way that you're talking about, like if there's something that's difficult to collect over the phone, like let's say the caller's location needs to be collected for some reason. Can we leverage multi-channel in that way so that we as the automated system can send them a form where they can drop a pin that then the call center worker can see, because it would be difficult to tell the call center worker, your latitude and longitude, just like it would be difficult to tell us. And so I think that like the way that I tend to think about call center agent and AI collaboration is very similar to this multi-channel question, which is like there are certain things that certain channels are going to be geared towards, and you want to keep your mind open to all of those different possibilities. I don't necessarily have a more detailed or insightful idea than you do about like what those specific things are that are going to be crucial for AI and agent collaboration, because just like you said, we're in this flux right now of user adoption and like user behavior when it comes to AI and their willingness to interact. And also the capabilities of AI are evolving so rapidly that that's going to look different, in 6 months than it does now.
Yeah, I think the only thing you do is continue listening to customers and also continue focusing on the value side. Like, what is something that you want an employee to be able to do that they can't do right now? And is the reason they can't do it because of their time, because of their training, or because of the data they have access to? And depending on the answer there, that'll determine what role AI, if any, can play in making that easier. So I think, again, starting to ask the questions of like, what are we trying to achieve? And then looking at data and listening to determine whether you are achieving it. Those are going to be fundamental things I think make a lot of sense. Now, as we wrap up here, the classic final thoughts question. But, Matt, I really am curious about your perspective, because one of the things I found so refreshing throughout this discussion has been the emphasis on learning, both learning as someone going through the process, but also learning in terms of what do the users think about these changes being made. So that also means you're probably someone who can recognize when things can be done better, when recognize when lessons present themselves. So any takeaways, lessons learned, thing that you think will be valuable for the audience as they embark on similar AI transformation journeys?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest piece like that I touched on earlier, right, was getting a lot of your contact center experts to be in a collaborative exercise with you through the design, through the experience. Data is also huge. I think we've not only used data to be able to kind of like choose what we focus on, how we focus on it, but it's also helped us identify the opportunities to kind of tweak and tune a little bit more with some of these experiences that we've developed. And I think Oliver had mentioned it earlier, just of how much data there actually is. And we've put a very big focus on data and the back end of what's being generated from an intent and a topic and a subtopic perspective, not only for like current, but long-term use. We've got the examples of we've historically struggled with the habitual customer calling and pressing zero. So there's a large gap in understanding what our customer's historical journey has been with us. And so being able to take that as well as then build this journey with Poly and with our bot, that knowledge that we know we want and need to be able to dictate and inform operations of what's going on. We've really put that into the very early stages of this and continue to kind of build that out. I think those would be kind of like the really two big ones, just from an operational standpoint.
Yeah, and I think it hits on the idea that you almost have to be better to get better. In that, if we don't make AI platforms worth engaging, then we won't get the data from customer behavior, from the way they communicate, to know how we can continue to improve those. And in fact, we find things like when we do our survey, the number one way to get customers to try using a self-service tool is to assure them that they can easily exit and go straight to a live agent. Now, surely there's some cheekiness to that, which is like, yeah, I'll use your chatbot, but I'm just going to press zero right or go for the agent right away. But I think it also speaks to this idea that like when we show that like you're not locked in, but give it a shot because we're pretty confident it's going to work, you start to build some culture around and some confidence that maybe I could give it a shot. And yeah, they're going to be on a very short leash. You're going to be very impatient, but you'll start to see what's breaking down, what's causing the problem, and then you can continue to get better. But if we don't even overcome the basic stigma, we don't even make it accessible enough for people to even really give it a shot, give it the old college try, so to speak, then we're not going to learn why they're rejecting it. Are they rejecting it because 10 years ago, one of your competitors had an awful, chatbot they deployed in front of them? Or are they rejecting it because they truly tried and they just couldn't explain their issue? Or they felt like their issue was too complex? All these things matter, and all these things impact how we design the journey. Now, Oliver, when you're thinking about we talked about some of the critical components of designing dialogue, thinking about the ways to design that, but what are some maybe non-negotiables that we haven't talked about, things that you need to see in the organization to know that you're not just doing this as sort of like a superficial gesture, but you're really getting into the weaves of what it takes to create cohesive dialogue-based journeys for your customers? Besides hiring someone like Oliver to engineer some of it.
Um, I think quality assurance testing that involves actual end users, as with everything, like is really the gold standard, because ultimately, like, you are going to get yourself locked into your imagination of what the end user is going to say, or what the kind of edge cases you're going to encounter are, and those will never be right, or all of them. So I think that getting actual end users to interact with it, and then having the agility to very quickly respond to that input that you get sort of early on in a deployment, whether it's through sort of like a focus grouping, or a quality assurance period, or early on when the deployment is live, being flexible and dynamic to like really rapidly start deploying some specifically experience oriented changes. Like, I think, as with everything, perhaps more than everything, I think it's easy when you're implementing an AI self-service solution to, get bogged down in the functionality, which is obviously the core of it. Like, it needs to work, but it also, like, you need to prioritize that experience and have someone who's there to prioritize the experience, and treat those changes as the sort of rapid demand period of change. Treat those changes as equally significant, because, like you're saying, like, if it's not good, and if the culture is built around it that it's not good, then it's basically all for naught, because you're not going to get that engagement, you're not going to get that data, which is going to spin the flywheel and start, like, bringing you real returns on that implementation.
Yeah, because the thing to remember here is it's two experiences that are now being judged. It's the overall way you solve the problem. So the customer's thinking, okay, how easy or difficult was it for me to solve whatever problem I was inquiring, and whether that's the different channels I had to go through, the different answers I had to deal with, the different fighting I had to do to get the resolution I want. They're judging based on that. But you're also now introducing a new experience, a new way of interacting that they weren't interacting with previously. And if that isn't good, then there's two things they're upset about. They're upset about whatever they were contacting you in the first place, and they're upset because you made them use a very difficult, non-conversational, hard to engage with platform. And so you're now introducing a new experience which can either make or break the relationship, regardless of how committed you were to solving their original problem. And so that's definitely why experience has to come first. So I love that mindset. Again, I love everything you've said here. Same with Matt. I think you both brought a really fresh perspective to an area where we want to prescribe so much. We want to set our goals and we want to have all the right answers. The truth is, you find the right answer by designing in a way that lets the customer behave organically, that is built for them. You learn how they communicate, what they feel understood about, what they don't feel understood about, and what you can do better. And that is really how you elevate connections. That's how you need to think about AI. That's what real empathy is. And that's the key to effective dialogue design. I want to thank you both so much for joining us. Thanks, of course, to Poly for partnering with us on a great discussion. And of course, thanks to all of you who joined for your great questions that, since we're out of time, we didn't get to, but we'll be following up shortly because there's a lot of great stuff here. So thanks so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.